Thank you for joining For Our Special Kids, where we openly and honestly discuss the magic and the mess of raising a child with special needs. We are thrilled to have you here and hope this time provides you with some wonder and wisdom. I'm your host, Jennifer Lansing. Let's get started. Okay, I think this episode is a really fun chat with Sylvia Shordike. She is a mentor of mine and Teal's primary teacher for movement and neuroplasticity work. Sylvia was my second guest, so episode number 2. To learn more about what she's referencing and NeuroHorizons and what neuroplasticity is and what a lesson is, I definitely suggest checking that episode out as well. So in this conversation, we get into why it's so important for a child to know how to fall before they know how to walk, why horses can walk within an hour or so of birth, why differentiation is so important, and why it is also so important that we continue to refine ourselves throughout our lives. We decided to record this episode because Teal is walking now, like a champ, but it didn't just happen. It wasn't an overnight miracle. She has been seeing Sylvia for lessons since she was 3 years old. And she also had SPML surgery, which is selective percutaneous myofascial lengthening surgery, this summer. That allowed some of those puzzle pieces that had been laid down with the work with Sylvia to come together into a more full picture for her brain. So Sylvia and I have a lot of fun during this episode, and I hope you have some fun with it too. I do hope you enjoy, and let me know what you think. Sylvia Shordike was a trainer for the Anat-Baniel method and is now the founder of NeuroHorizons. She is the originator of the personalized NeuroHorizons experiential learning programs for parents and professionals. She is a Guild-certified Feldenkrais practitioner and has been in private practice since 1994. In addition, she is an author of the NeuroHorizons Primer. I am so excited to have you here, Sylvia. Thank you for joining me again.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So there's been huge growth in Teal. And I think that's what prompted me to reach back out to you to say, okay, let's talk about this development. And really, it began when Teal was, I think, 3 years old. We came to you for an intensive, and we can get into details on that later. But we came to you and everyone was focusing on her walking. We've got to have her walking. We've got to have her up on her feet. We've got to have her moving and stepping. And I will never forget, you looked at Alex and me and you said, before we teach her how to walk, we have to teach her how to fall. Tell me what that means.
Well, to just answer the question quickly, and then I go back to what you mentioned about me seeing Teal for the first time. And that's when I had my first impression of Teal, right? So that, because my first impression and my first observation of the child that comes to me for the first time, I observe and I see and scan what is happening at the current time. But first, to answer the question quickly, when we go into the uprightness as a human being, what it means that the head is now further apart from, of course, from the floor, so to speak. That's why a child develops, bit by bit over many, many months, more over a year. Some are roughly a year, but some take longer time to actually come into the uprightness and start to walk. And before, first we roll on the floor. If everything works out and we have a neurotypical child, we start rolling. That's very, very comfortable, very safe. Our head is close to the floor. We roll around. Then we come up a little higher to simplify it on all fours. And so now we have 4 basically places that we can lean into with gravity. We have the 2 hands, we have the 2 knees, we have the feet that just drag along in the crawling. And then the head is in the uprightness, but a little higher, of course. And then from there, we come into the squatting. And then from there, we come into stand. So the moment the child stands for the first time, the head is on its highest point that it ever has been. That also means I need to know how to go back to the floor, because if I don't, the danger is much higher, because I can injure my skull, my head, as simple as that. Everybody, I think, can understand that, right? So that's why in the process, in the neurotypical process of development, as the child learns to come from the ground, from all fours into the uprightness, they have learned to also reverse the movement. And because they have learned to reverse the movement, when they suddenly fall, they know what to do. They know how to catch themselves with the hand. They know how to bend the legs quickly. The brain does that automatically, that they roll over or they catch themselves with the hand, and the head is not in danger. And I think if everybody takes a minute and thinks about that, common sense.
Yes, common sense. But Teal missed all those things.
But it's that elusive, obvious piece. It should be clear to everybody. But then, interestingly, it's not when we have a child with special need who was not able to go these developmental typical steps, has not learned to roll, has not learned to crawl, and all of a sudden it's time to stand. They reached an age, we reach now the milestone where they're supposed to be standing, they're supposed to be walking, and all of a sudden all this amazing development that happened or should happen over months is out the door. So now on the feet, on the legs, and so on. Having said that, and you can stop me anytime, Jen, if I talk too much.
No, I love it.
So having said that, now, when I saw Teal come in with you guys for the first time, and I remember you were showing me how she was practicing holding onto a stick, and I could see how she was kind of not just holding, I mean, she was hanging on that stick for dear life. And she was trying to do steps. And actually, she was, to simply describe it, put one foot in front of the other. However, it was not walking. And it wasn't standing either. So I see that. And then I know, oh, wow, let's back way off. We have to start at a very different place here.
It was hugely crucial. I just immediately, my brain started realizing exactly like that process. Like I could just see it in my own self, like, whoa, hold on. Just because it says, it being milestones and it being the books and it being the doctors and the therapists, it wasn't right for Teal. And I think that's what's really cool about what you're doing is you, like you said, you scan the child. You say, hold on, where are we now? And then you try to pretty much like decipher what's missing, right? Like what is missing up to this point now. And that is a really cool place to start. And it helped us realize, I had to start educating everyone that interacted with her. Right. Is no, don't put her on her feet. No, not yet. Not yet. Yeah. And I, sometimes we forget that this process started at 3 years old, right? And she's just walking now at 6.5.
Right.
Which, hello, that's huge celebration. Woo, woo, go Teal. But we don't just go from, oh, boom, we had a few lessons and then, boom, we're walking. This has been a huge, long process. And Correct. So we've talked a little bit about, sometimes we present it like, oh, it's a miracle. Like, no, it took a lot of your work. It took a lot of our work. It took a lot of lessons. It took a lot of thinking about it and stepping away from Teal and watching her and not pushing her and letting her be. And so I think that's just a huge thing. And I just so appreciate that. So I wanted to go through that. And then let's step back then. We talked about this at Teal's last lessons, which were just a week ago, about the difference between how like a horse walks and like why a horse can within 2 minutes of being born stand up and walk, and how children take 12 months, 9 to 18 months, a neurotypical child. Will you just talk us through that from the mammal's anatomy perspective and why that matters?
Absolutely. I just want to back off very quickly before I forget. I took a note. You said for Teal it wasn't right. Yeah, when for the practicing at the given time to walk and stand and all that stuff, it wasn't right for her. I see when a child has so many links missing that will bring them to walking, then it's not right for anybody. There's no child in the world that can learn when there's too much information for the nervous system missing. Yeah, I call it the links. In order to learn something new, the new learning has to be close enough to your existing being at the time. There's still some stress and struggle in order to find something out new. That's normal. That's called learning. That's called maturing. That's called differentiation. But if it's too far away, it's impossible for the brain to figure out. And it creates, on top of that, an enormous amount of stress for the brain. The brain goes into fight or flight motion, and it creates more spasticity, and there is zero learning. It's just repetition, but there's no learning happening for the child.
The example, like I think about like just putting a toy too far out of reach for a child. Like you don't ever do that for like a 3-month-old. You're not like, okay, I'm going to put it 6 feet away from you. Good luck. We never do that.
Exactly. That's cruel, right? And then they will give up ever going there, So, or I tell parents often, look, what they or what's been trying to be done right now to your child is like somebody asking you to jump to the moon, or to jump up the tree, or do dog flip it up in the air if you're not a gymnast, I mean, like that's how far they're right now away from it, and so it creates a huge amount of stress. So, and now back to your question about the horse and the human being. When a herd animal gets born, then it's a herd animal, meaning like it's part of a herd. And so in the genetic of the herd animal's brain has it wired already in utero. Everything is wired for it to be born and taking a few minutes or whatever on its kind of woody, kind of shaky legs and then they have to walk with the herd. And they're wired like that in their genes, in their whole nervous system. Brain is already pre-wired for that because that animal needs it for survival. It's always about survival. For a human being, the baby gets born and it has to learn to do everything. So the brain is not tabula rasa completely because they have made experience in the womb, they heard the mother, they saw light, they feel if the mother is stressed or not stressed, or the baby feels movement. I mean, so there's already information. However, when they come out, an infant can basically, hopefully, when everything goes fine, they can sucking reflex right away kicks in. They breathe, they digest, and they start to see, but they still have to learn to really see. We all know that too. So, and then they start to wiggle without any intention. But that's all they're supposed to do. And then very quickly after that, after they're born, the awake phase, they actually start to have random movement. And that means they actually move, they twitch without having any intention yet. They don't have any intention stepping on the foot or grabbing a toy yet or grabbing anything. That's how it starts. But there's already movement. So that means they're already relating to the parent in movement. But also if you put the baby on the floor or in the crib and they start sleeping on the side or on the back, then they relate to gravity. And it starts right away.
Yeah. And that's all learning. That's all those jigsaw puzzles. I mean, it's like a billion-piece jigsaw puzzle, right? Where all of these little pieces make up the whole. And if you miss certain little pieces, like rolling around all of that, it really does have a huge impact.
Absolutely. And if you look at a child with spasticity, with a brain injury, And so it's funny because I just did this one day workshop in Turkey, and I had people on the floor. And that's the thing. If you really experience it in your own body and you get the kinesthetic experience, then you start to understand better, because it's not just words, it's actually your own embodied experience. And that's how we learn anyhow. We only learn by feeling and not by being told something. It's all, that's how the child learns from the beginning, by feeling itself and how it relates to the environment. And the environment includes the floor, the gravity, the parent body, everything, the caregiver, whoever is there. And that's how they learn. And in my program, we start with the first segment, and it's all about the first 4 months in life, where you actually start to get a glimpse and learn that when the child is on the back, before they even can roll onto the belly, actually, in fact, before they're on all fours and start crawling, and you have them on the back and give them the freedom to have their random movement, they're already connecting with the movement of the pelvis through the spine to the head, the rolling of the head, the rolling of the pelvis, and then having those little limbs, those little legs fold up, and occasionally by accident falling onto the floor, like a little bit the heel, a little bit the toe, which creates a little bit of a gentle force into their little pelvis, which makes their pelvis roll a touch or lift a touch. That movement goes into the spine. That movement goes into the head. And so, in other words, what I'm saying here by describing this, the baby starts to already map their little foot and leg into their pelvis, into their spine for way later, 14 months down the road before they stand up. And if you take that away from them, or if they could never do it, then I'm saying if you take it away from them, if you put the kid too much, strap them into devices, a typical child, or you don't let them explore enough on the floor because they're constantly in some kind of a swing, or God knows what it all is nowadays. You take that away from a typical child, which creates problems. And when we have a child who just can't do it because they're hijacked by their spasticity and they just can't figure out how to roll, then we step in as NeuroHorizons practitioner, mentors like you or yourself, or Feldenkrais or Anat Banyan, whatever. But it's like people who understand how brain plasticity works, and that learning happens only by feeling and sensing. So you have to help the child to feel and sense so they can make internally their own connection, kinesthetic connection, and only their brain and their nervous system can change. And you have to be patient, because sometimes the brain injury is as such that it takes time. But as I told my students in the workshop on Saturday, if you have a child that cannot feel the connection between the head and the pelvis through the spine, they will never learn to walk, because the leg has nothing to attach to for the brain, for the nervous system. It makes no sense. Right. You can strap them into machines and make the machine make them walk, sure. But for them to be able to shift weight from one foot onto the other, that Teal now is doing, and she does it in her own little Teal way, and we still have to, of course, work on refinement and all that stuff. But for her to step and at the same time be able to reach with the hand and point out and look and listen to a helicopter go by and turn her head and see something, that's multitasking as you are managing your weight shifting. That's very complex, very, very complex. And only her brain and her nervous system could have figured that out.
Yeah. And I'm so proud of her. Like when you describe it that way, I think we all just need to be more gentle with our neuroatypical children. I mean, truthfully, like when you really break it down into all of these steps, it's gargantuan and quite miraculous that this child who did miss all of the planting the foot and feeling the pelvis and feeling the spine and feeling the head, she missed all of that. To now 6 years later or 5.5 years later, be walking and looking and listening and all of that, and not just falling over. I mean, it's amazing. One thing that I wanted to talk about, and you mentioned it, is the refinement. So our brain doesn't stop growing. Our brain doesn't stop making neural connections. And so now we look at Teal and we don't just say, okay, we're all good. We're done. Good job. You're walking. It's like, no, now we continue to feed the brain through refinement. So what does refinement mean from your perspective?
Well, it means more the path on more differentiation. And that is actually true for anybody.
So let's talk about, first of all, what is differentiation?
Okay, so let's say I want to go back to a baby. Let's say we look at a neurotypical child, because if you don't understand, I always say, if you don't understand what's happening in a neurotypical child, then you don't understand, or you don't know how to help a child with special needs. That's what always drives me crazy when there's certain people told, do this and that with your child. When I go, well, if they would be really observing a neurotypical baby on the floor, they wouldn't be saying that, because it's all about how do you observe in the world. Right. So let's say everybody maybe knows, but those who maybe have not had a typical child, then you don't know. But also with the typical children, at the beginning, they move both of the arms at the same time, often. Not always, but often.
Nobody can see you, but you're flapping your arms together.
Yeah. My family always says, do you always have to talk with your whole body?
Yes, she does. She's a movement specialist.
I'm kind of like in Italian, that way. But but anyway, so the baby hasn't really differentiated the two arms. And it doesn't even know at the very beginning that it even has two arms, because it's not connected to an intentional movement. So by the time they learn to do an intentional movement with their hand, bringing the hand to the mouth, sucking on it, or grabbing a toy, rattling it, and doing it only with one hand, there is the differentiation in the nervous system in the brain that the brain recognizes, oh, you have the right hand, you can rattle, and you have a left hand. So that is an example for differentiation.
Well, and for example, still, so Teal is 6 right now. When we ask her how old she is, both hands show 5 and then both hands show 1. And so I know that her brain has not mapped out that, oh my gosh, hold on, these fingers are different. She knows that she has 2 different hands, but yes, now I think it's moving there into refinement of, okay, now we refine into fingers.
Yes, and that's a very good example, actually, because in the hands and in the wrist, you often see the level of differentiation that the child is at, because it gets very complex when it comes to differentiation of the fingers. And even with adults, you have them go on the floor and tell them do certain things with their ankles that they haven't done for a while. And all of a sudden, their hands get all crampy and spastic, and they don't even know it. Even the neurotypical adult has a lack of differentiation and can figure it out if they pay attention and if they slow down. And if I, as a teacher, feed them with different variation so that they can broaden their awareness around it, and then they can change it. That's the learning process. But if you're not aware of it, you can't change it. And so that is all the example of differentiation. So we as neurotypical people, let's say, we also have to keep differentiating. I mean, it's sad if you become 20 years old and then you stop differentiating, because so we want to learn new skills, then you learn to, drive the car, then you learn to play maybe an instrument. If you play an instrument, the differentiation between the fingers, your eyes, your arms, your elbows, and your spine is very different than for somebody who doesn't play an instrument, So it depends on how you live your life and what you do with yourself. You keep differentiating and you keep refining your skills. which also gives you the chance to refine, mature, and differentiate also in your emotional body, which is very, very important. Maybe we can do another podcast about that at some point, but that's very interesting because it's not separated.
We've watched Teal differentiate her emotions a little bit more now, because now we can have a conversation and you can be working on her or doing a lesson with her. It's better verbiage, doing a lesson with her. And she doesn't she doesn't complain anymore. Before, she used to show emotion of distress when you weren't paying all the attention to her. So fascinating. She is bit by bit learning that as well.
Exactly. Even though I was paying attention to her, but often with the kids in mind, they have a fear because they don't feel themselves yet not enough fully grounded, that they're depending on the constant attention that they think they get in a certain way. And if they don't get it, then they have a hard time emotionally. But the more they find themselves, they feel themselves, how they are, connected to the environment, they don't need it so much anymore. They're fine. They're fine with themselves more.
Well, and that's why I think people really do separate. Oh, well, it's just movement. It's like, well, no, it's really all brain. And you're just using the bones and the awareness to create neural connections. And that has profound shift in everything. It doesn't just help Teal to walk. It helps her be a more whole human being within her environment.
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not just, if it were just about movement, then maybe all the drilling would work.
Right. And you're referring to some other therapies that kind of have repetitions or drilling or things like that.
Well, especially I refer to it when it's really not, I don't want to talk anybody down, but if it's really inappropriate, for example, if I have a child that really has absolutely not figured out, I want to make it simpler because otherwise I talk too complicated again. A child that has not figured out how to sit, how to sit. So it's one milestone that everybody knows, yeah? So I don't even talk about the rolling right now, pushing off to sit and so on. So can't sit by himself, herself, okay? Unless it's propped up with pillows or and sit in one of these chairs, where they don't have to hold themselves up themselves. If a child can't do that, that means certain mechanisms to deal with gravity are not working yet. They haven't figured out how to carry their head over their spine or the spine under the head. They don't know how to be upright in the sitting position. To practice and to do exercises with those children and have them on a balance beam, on a board, and or hold the 2 feet and swing them around in the air. So hopefully they're going to figure out balance and gravity. That is inappropriate in my world completely, because now I'm going back to the links. The next link is just too far away from where they are at this current time. And the thing is, you can't make it up. If it's not there, it's not there. And you can do these things forever, sometimes for years, and they will not bring you or the child anywhere unless somebody steps in and gives the brain and nervous system more information that they can start building on it.
You really are very clear. And we've talked about this, like, you kind of motivate me to have another kid. Okay, it's not happening. However, it would be really interesting to approach an infant with these concepts of let them roll on the floor. If you need to put them in extra clothes because your floor is cold, fine. Let them roll on the floor. Don't prop them up. And you're very open about that, of all of the tools that assist us to get a child upright. And they're not appropriate for the child. The other thing, or for the neurodevelopment of the child, the
Right.
natural neurodevelopment, yeah, you got it. So one thing that you are also very clear about, which I know is extremely controversial, is tummy time. Now, we're not going to say doctors are wrong, et cetera, but from a neurologically developed concept, that's not the right word, but you know what I mean? Why is tummy time not something that you encourage?
Because, so first of all, we're talking about neurotypical children right now for a moment, right?
Well,
okay.
I mean, tummy time for anybody is bad, but yes, let's go neurotypical.
Yes, because I'm saying this because when I work with the children with special needs and they cannot roll onto their belly yet by themselves, I do work with them in belly positions, but that's different because I also give them information, feed their brain and nervous system with information, and I make it so that they're really comfortable. That's a very important piece. So they don't get agitated, you know. So why?
Well, because agitation does not allow for learning.
Exactly. It does not allow for learning. And if they are spastic, they will get more spastic. Bottom line. So a child that hasn't figured out to roll from side to side, and then because now they tell them to do it right away after birth. So that means the child hasn't even figured out yet to roll on the side. We're not even talking about rolling onto the belly.
They don't even know they have a belly. They don't even know they have a back at this point when they're born. Yeah.
Yeah, so they don't know where the sides are, and then they're being put on the belly. So, and I come back to the random movement. This is the key, and this is what I'm saying. If the professionals would observe a baby one way or the other, then you see what you see. It's obvious, yeah, because then you have an infant, you put them on the back, and you will see this will wiggle around. That's the random movement thing, not really intentional yet, but there is movement. And with every little move, there is a slight weight shift through their body, and that informs the brain. And that's, by the way, also true when they get carried around by the parent. You know, so that's what I was saying. The best place for your child is on the floor, comfortable, a nice, cozy floor, or you carry them around. You know, and if you can't carry them, put them on the floor. Don't put them in crazy devices. Yeah. So that's that. And then because on the back, they do random movement. So that means the brain is busy gathering information in relation to their environment and to gravity. When a child is put on the belly before they can roll there by themselves, they have almost zero movement because they cannot yet use the extensor muscles to lift up their head because they haven't developed the back yet.
Okay, you know? So the extensor muscles are in the back that support the spine.
Yes, exactly. So those are the right now that we're sitting here, or anybody is sitting watching us, what keeps you up in the sitting position are mainly your extensor muscles that are built to work basically all day long until you go to bed. And hopefully then you know how to let go so you can regenerate. And then you use them again next day when you get up. So, but the baby hasn't learned that. So then they're on the belly and they can't really hold their head. So that means the breathing gets very poor. The face is squished into the floor. They can only rub, maybe they can lift it a little bit and then so rub the face or the nose from side to side. And often they scream because they hate it, because they're uncomfortable. And they can't use their arms and legs, and they don't know what to do. So right. So often they scream until they fall asleep, or because they give up, or the mother or the father or somebody has mercy and picks them up, can't stand it anymore.
Well, and then you think about how that relates to their safety, like their feeling of I am in a safe environment, I am in a safe space. I mean, that has to have some effect.
That's the emotional piece that is also very important, you know. But the other thing is, if we look again a little bit to the mechanics, what happens in the body, yeah? So a child on the back can move more. A child on the belly moves less. And that is not what we want. And the idea of why people say that often, the idea is behind the baby can learn to strengthen the back muscle. So the hope is there, they're going to fidget around, which they do after a while. They will start doing that actually. They reflexively try to kind of flip around like a fish on water. But if you again observe a child on the back when they move, and then you watch what they do, the pelvis rolls one way, the head rolls the other way, then they side bend a little bit, then they flex, and then they flex again, and then they side bend a little bit, and then the head rolls to the left, the pelvis rolls to the left too. All of a sudden the pelvis rolls to the right, the head to the left. So there's so many beautiful movements that go through the core. And now I'm coming to that core idea that we need to have a strong core. We don't need a strong core. We need a dynamic core that is connected in the nervous system in the brain, that knows how to move in any given direction.
I love it. It's just a profoundly different way of looking at things. Who wrote the book that basically took pictures of the children in the orphanage?
Oh, yes. Yes. The beautiful pictures I showed you. That was Emmy Pickler.
Okay.
Emmy Pickler, she was running this way back in Hungary, the orphanage, and she had this amazing eye for what is important for the child and the developmental. That's why the pictures are so brilliant, because otherwise she would have taken those pictures.
So she basically, if I understand it correctly, she let children develop and move the way they naturally should. So she just allowed them. It wasn't like she left them to flounder. That's not it. But she let them move on their own. And these pictures, I highly encourage everyone to just at least Google it and look at some of the photos, because the way the child bends naturally, and it makes us realize as adults how little we actually move and bend. But it's fascinating.
Yes. And by the way, when you talk about adults, that is exactly it's I can talk about this forever, but it's so true. When we lose as neurotypical adults that same quality between the movement between the pelvis and the head, that we have the awareness, that we have a spine that can articulate, that we have a chest, we call it rib cage, which I don't like, because cage, we have an idea like it's a cage, it doesn't move. It moves, it has to move. And when we stop having that awareness, and when we don't move there anymore, that's when we create the neck problem, the shoulder problem, the knee problem, the ankle problem, the hip problem, you name it. Anything in the extremity or in the neck starts to hurt, because that dynamic core that we learned hopefully to use as a baby, we have to bring that back into the picture to heal the painful extremities. What do we do instead? Instead, we often, now we have to stretch that, we have to do range of motion with the shoulder, we have to, okay, didn't work. Okay, then we do operate it. Okay, then we operate it, fix it. But then if you still don't teach that person to move the ribs underneath the shoulder, they will hurt the shoulder again. So and that actually the same principles for injured people or people who are on chronic pain, then what I do with the kids with special needs.
Yeah. I remember so I've taken your 10 segments and it's phenomenal, and it's completely changed how I interact with Teal, and it has and still does influence how I move. So like when I'm driving in the car, which I do a lot with Teal, and a lot of these mamas and dads are in the car with their children, getting them from this therapy to that therapy and this lesson to that lesson and even just actively moving my pelvis when I drive, like you taught me, like, okay, hold on, I can move my pelvis, and look, my neck pain just went away. Right. And you taught us that with correct movement, your brain like absorbs the pain. It's very fascinating when it actually happens.
Yes.
So I encourage people, you call this like the four corners of the clock, or the four movements. What is that called? I'm so sorry. But like, we're both sitting here. If people could see us, we're both like moving our pelvises right now. We're like, oh yeah. Okay. So I'm going to tip it up, and I'm going to tip it back, and I'm going to tip it to the right and the left. I encourage people as they're listening, especially if they're in their car right now, just feel your pelvis, feel your sits bones like on the seat and pushing in, and shift your weight and move your knee forward and move your other knee forward.
And please also pay attention to the traffic.
Yes. Thank you, Sylvia, for not getting me sued. Thank you. But it's so valuable. And, you said this quote, and then we're going to have to stop this interview because I do know that you could talk about this for the next 5 hours and I would keep asking questions. So you said this at your last interview with me. You said, and it's so appropriate. I have it written down and it's on my bulletin board. You said, if you learn again to move like a child, you will grow older very differently.
Absolutely.
And I think what you just talked about is the epitome of that. This statement here is what we all want. And whether or not you are neurotypical or not neurotypical, or you have a child that isn't or is, it's so valuable for us to move with intention and to feel the bones underneath the muscles and how it's all connected and how it all continually feeds our brain.
Absolutely. And I want to just say one little thing before we close, because you're really on it. You mentioned awareness and sensation and feeling. And that is the key thing for being in touch with ourselves. So I don't like to use the word correct movements because people go right away into, somebody told me to do it this way and that way, which can be absolutely for that particular person in that situation incorrect, because it's a concept again that's somewhere out there in the world. We need to go internal more. That's what we do with the movement, to embody, to feel and sense and grow that way, exactly how a typical child does that when you leave them alone. And when I say leave them alone, I don't mean abandon them, never hold your child and all that stuff. Of course, you hold your child.
Oh, you tough German, Sylvia. You tough German. I swear she said, ignore your child. I'm kidding.
You understand? Just don't strap them into things.
Yeah.
They don't need that. They don't miss it. It's like, this is what I say in my videos when you give out my website in that one little video. Because once you have the child, you train that child being in that funny thing, being upright, even though they're not upright yet, and they can look around that way. All of a sudden, they don't want to go to the floor anymore. You don't want that. And if you don't do that with your child, they are just enjoying themselves exactly there on the floor, as much as they like to be held, being with you on the floor, having some toys around, looking around. Seeing the light coming in, hearing you walk by, whatever is going on.
Well, and I encourage everyone to lay down on the floor with their child as well. Like it's amazing when I lay down on the floor with Teal and look up at the sky or up at the ceiling, or all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, there's spider webs here and there. You notice so many more things when you're on the floor.
Because you also slow down, which is such an amazing, important piece, especially for the kids with special needs. Slow down so that they can follow, that they can feel.
I love it. There's one closing question, and that is, this may be really challenging for you. Tell me one moment that you remember with a child with special needs that was magical.
One moment?
I know.
This is really interesting because every child that comes to me, once I connect with them, for me, every moment is magical. And that is not that it's because I'm doing some kind of a strange woo-woo thing. It's real because there's a brain, there's a nervous system. It responds to touch. It responds to connecting. It responds to movement. This is all real. But still, it's magical when you see when that connection between the two nervous systems or more nervous systems, because mother's in the room too, starts to come together, dance together onto new neural paths.
Perfect. I wouldn't expect anything less from you in that question, in that answer. You're like, Jen, everything is magical. I love it. Fantastic. Thank you so very much. I did want to do a quick shout out that Teal did also have SPML surgery, and we are going to be interviewing Dr. Nuzzo about that. And so that was a huge piece in also how her brain started making new connections. But the lessons that she had with you prior and Andrea and the lessons after were hugely important in that development. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll be talking about that in the future as well. Sylvia, as always, it's hugely entertaining for me because I love you and know you. But I'm like, oh, there she goes again. She's going to get back to my question, but she's going to answer another one first. I love it. Thank you so very much for your time. And if people do want to reach out to you, how can they find you? I'll put it all in the show notes, but it's also nice to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, please give them my website, NeuroHorizons.us. All the world works also for people in the US. And then I have NeuroHorizons.eu for Europe.
Perfect.
And find me there, and you can reach me through there. And there are very informative videos on my homepage there as well. And I do start a new program on August 26th with a new 10-segment program. And they're fantastic. Please be in touch if you're interested.
I highly recommend them. If your child is 6, your child does not have to be 0. Your child can be 10, 15. I talked to Anne-Marie just today, and her child is 18, and she's consistently using your lessons. So thank you for that. I highly encourage everyone to go check that out. And Sylvia, thank you again for your time. We'll bring you back at some point.
It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found 1 or 2 meaningful nuggets of information to make your day better. If you think there's value in what we do, please take a moment to tell another friend, family member, or a caregiver. We'd love to hear from you at forourspecialkids@gmail.com. You can send in a question, a comment, a topic that you'd like to learn more about, or if you'd like us to highlight a certain person, please send that information to us. It makes our show so much better and so much more valuable for you. Our Facebook and Instagram handle is For Our Special Kids. And finally, remember to witness the wonder and the wisdom within yourself and others. Until next time.